Hello, my friend. Today I bring you another lost legend from the depths of Middle-earth. Close your eyes, feel the magic surround you. Our journey begins. In the east, beyond the Sea of Rune, where no hobbit's map has curled its corner, the wind carries tales older than Gondor, and stars still shine upon lands forsaken by law. There lies a silence so deep it cannot be measured by years, only by the forgetting of names. The world had grown quiet, but not the silence of peace. No, this was the hush of something waiting, crouched behind the veil of twilight. The West knew it not. Gondor stood proud beneath the white tree, and the Shire sang songs of ale and pipe smoke. But east of the Ephel Duath, beyond even the knowledge of the White Council, the world twisted. It began with a shift in the winds, subtle but known to those who listened. In the wide wastes of Rune, where the grasses stretch like dry sea foam and the stars bend close to the earth, the shepherds of dust and dune saw their flocks wither and birth no more. In Khand, the black eagles no longer circled. They fled westward, over stone teeth long forgotten. And far beyond, farther than even the marching feet of Mordor had reached, the skies changed hue. There, in lands once sung only in the long chants of the elves before their sailing, two cloaked figures stood upon a crag, silent beneath a veil of stars. They were Istari, though none in the West called them such. In the blue of twilight, they came, long ago, sent from the West, beyond the circles of the world, not to rule, but to guide, not to conquer, but to counsel. Yet the histories that followed Gandalf and Saruman named them not, for these two passed into shadowed lands and did not return. But the East remembers, not in song or story, but in hushes, in tales murmured by firelight and in carvings upon ruined stone. One bore a staff bound in sea oak and iron, the other a crystal orb hidden beneath his robe, ever cold to the touch. They were called Alatar and Pallando, and none now speak their true names in the tongues of men. The people they found, wanderers, seers, tribes forgotten even by Sauron, knew them by other titles, Windfriend and One Who Listens. And it was here, upon the slopes of a dead volcano, whose last breath had blackened the sky 1,000 years before, that they saw it, a light beneath the stone, faint, sickly, but growing. The earth cracked subtly, like a wound healing in reverse. "Can you feel it?" whispered Pallando, his voice like frost on a mirror. Alatar did not answer at once, his hand pressed against the black soil. What he felt was not warmth, but memory, twisted, buried, ancient. Magic once spoken by beings not of this world. "It stirs," he said, "not in strength, but in hunger." They had come seeking rumors. There were whispers among the wanderers, that the stars in the east no longer followed their old paths, that dreams had turned sour, that children were being born with no reflections, that the crows had ceased speaking. But what they found was not a rumor, it was a remnant, a fragment, long buried, long cursed. Something older than Sauron, not stronger, but hungrier, unnamed, half alive, bound to the broken song of the world. The blue-robed wanderers looked west, toward a world that believed darkness was banished, toward lands where men grew proud and elves weary. But they knew what others did not, that the defeat of Morgoth had left behind not silence, but absence, and something had grown to fill it. "Do we tell them?" Pallando asked. "Not yet," said Alatar. "They wouldn't understand. And the White One." He paused, and the name Curanir tasted bitter on his tongue. He has his own shadow to chase. They turned, robes rustling like water, and descended into the sleeping valley. Their staffs bore no light, for light here would wake things better left dreaming. Behind them, the stars above Rhûn blinked once, then again, and one did not return. In the Shire, a child was born that night who would grow up to love maps. But far to the east, where the rivers run backward in the dry season and the moon rises red, a darkness old as the first fire cracked its eyes open. It had no name, for its name had been taken, and the blue wizards walked toward it. In the woodlands of eastern arid Lithui, long past where maps show named glades or roads of stone, there grew a forest known only to the nomads as Narcuin, the gloaming bough. The trees there did not whisper like those of Lothlorien, nor sigh as in Fangorn. They watched, bent and bark dark, their limbs reached not toward the sun, but toward one another, gnarled fingers clasping secrets in woven silence. Birds perched nowhere. Beasts that entered rarely emerged whole in mind or form. It was here that Pallando walked alone. Alatar had gone north to seek out the horse clans whose songs spoke of stars falling in pairs. But Pallando, ever the more attuned to things half heard, followed what could not be followed, the faint rustle of memory through roots too old for men to name. He passed beneath boughs that arched like ribs over a sleeping beast. The light thinned to greenish dusk, but his staff gave no glow. He dared not awaken anything. This was a forest of dreams long shed, and echoes that fled even elven tongues. It was not night, but it was not day. And then a sound, barely, not a footfall or wind, but something gentler, like a breath drawn by bark, a sigh pressed into moss. Pallando stilled. In that moment, even the air seemed to forget how to move. The trees, he now saw, were not silent. They were listening. He touched one, a tall yew, knotted and hollowed. His fingers pressed against its bark, and he whispered in the tongue of Valinor, soft and round as sea foam on sand. Anarile, Laita, Nai Uva, Tultien, Inarwa Uve. I come in peace. Grant me memory, if memory remains. And the tree responded, not in speech, but in scent, in the slow shudder of roots and branches. Pallando's mind blurred. He felt, not saw, a vision. A man, cloaked in flame, casting down a jewel that screamed. A shape, great and winged, torn in two by winds. A hill of ash where once stood a city, and from beneath its bones something rose. A whisper in the trees, not sound, but sensation. It broke, but not all of it. Pallando stumbled back, his staff driving into the loam. Sweat stood on his brow, though the air was cold. What had he seen? It was not the fall of Morgoth, nor the drowning of Numenor. Older, maybe, or perhaps younger. A crack in time, where something left behind had found root. He leaned on his staff, breath ragged. From behind him, a sound of branches parting. He turned sharply, but it was no beast. It was a child, or what once had been one. Small, wide-eyed, clothed in tangled reeds and faded charms. Its skin held the color of river clay, its eyes large and unblinking. It did not speak, but in its hand it held something. A shard of obsidian carved with a spiral. So finely etched, it shimmered in the gloom. Pallando stepped forward. "What is this?" he asked gently, kneeling. The child did not reply, only looked up, not at him, but at the canopy, and spoke in a voice too deep for such a frame. They left it in the tree, but the tree remembers. Then the child fell, not dead, but sleeping. A deep, ageless sleep. The obsidian shard remained in its hand. Pallando took it with care. The spiral burned cold in his palm, and within it, faintly, a humming, a song with no words, a whisper that never ceased. He knew now what the forest had shown, that the East did not forget. It had buried what it could not name, but the earth, like memory, could not keep its dead forever. The trees had begun to speak again, and their words were warnings. Across the grey flanks of the ashen hills, beneath the paling light of a winter dawn, a lone rider travelled without banner or sound. His horse, a dusky mare bred in the stables of Rohan long ago, carried him swift but silent, not as one in haste, but as one pursued by silence itself. The rider's cloak was the colour of smoke after storm. His hat, wide-brimmed and weather-beaten, shadowed a face old as autumn stone. Beneath the folds of that cloak gleamed a sword rarely drawn, and a staff bound with runes of flame long dormant. It was Mithrandir, though none here named him so. Gandalf the Grey rode east, not in search of war, not yet, but for knowledge, and for two who had not returned. The lands beyond Mordor were whispered of in elven council, but never spoken in full. Even Saruman had shown no interest in them. Too far, too wild, too shadow-bound. Yet now the signs could not be ignored. Strange birds had flown from Rhûn to Gondor's borders. Fire had been seen beneath the roots of hills long thought dead. And in Fangorn, Treebeard had murmured in his sleep. Two shadows walking eastward, he'd said, like rain in sunlight. So Gandalf had gone, as he often did, alone and without herald. He followed no road, for there were none, only deer trails and ancient riverbeds whose waters had long turned to dust. But he was not without purpose. He had found, at the edge of the Brownlands, a cairn built in haste, stones piled high with bones too old to crumble. Beneath it, wrapped in blue silk long faded, he had uncovered the sigil of one of his own kind, a circle of stars, broken at one edge. Alatar, or Pallando, he could not be sure. Now he rode eastward toward the Sea of Rhûn, where the land rippled like old parchment, and the sky bore no memory of the West. He passed through settlements where the people did not speak Westron, nor even the black speech, but a tongue guttural and half-sung. They feared him, not for his presence, but for what seemed to follow in his wake. One village had burned the day after he passed, though no fire had been seen. At night, he camped beneath trees that dripped sap like tears. He heard voices in his sleep, not dreams, but memories pressed against the veil of thought. They are not lost, one voice whispered, but they no longer follow the same star. On the seventh night, he reached the edge of the Nirith plains, where the grass grew taller than a man, and the wind keened like a wounded flute. There he dismounted and walked, for the land was uneasy beneath hooves. In the distance rose a shape, not a mountain, not a ruin, something in between, a mound of stone that did not belong, shaped by hands now forgotten, and atop it, a flame, blue, steady, unmoving. Gandalf's breath caught. No fire of men burned like that, nor was it elven make. He approached, each step echoing through the stillness. Atop the stone stood a figure cloaked in blue, though the face was hidden beneath a veil of woven light. A staff rested beside him, and from it curled a thread of smoke that did not rise but coiled downward. Alatar, Gandalf said, though his voice felt small beneath the stars. The figure turned slowly, and the face beneath the veil was neither young nor old, but worn as if by centuries of grief. But it was not Alatar. Pallando, the grey whispered, bowing his head. You came, said the blue. I feared I was too late. There is no late here, Pallando murmured, and his voice was like the wind before a storm. Only what wakes and what must be bound. They stood in silence then, two wizards beneath an uncaring sky. The flame between them did not flicker. Then Gandalf asked the question he had come to ask. Where is he? Pallando did not answer with words. He turned his gaze eastward, far past the mound, past the horizon, past even the sea of Rune, and his eyes clouded. He has gone deeper than time. Gandalf's staff trembled in his hand. A shadow stirred in the grass beyond, but neither wizard looked toward it. Their thoughts were upon something older, something broken, and slowly a wind rose. Far to the west of the Nirith plains, past where the river Carnin thinned into a red thread across the earth, the horizon rose into a jagged spine of woods. These were the dark borders of southern Mirkwood, though in the tongues of the east it was called Tarn Gur, the wound-root forest. For even the trees here bled when cut, and the roots groaned in the night, and atop the hill that brooded above it, black against the wine-red sky, stood the fortress, Dol Guldur. To most in Gondor, it was a tale of old, a place once haunted by shadow, purged by the White Council in a fire that cost much, but seemed to yield peace. But peace was always a veil, and now the veil trembled. Gandalf stood at the edge of a twisted glade, his grey cloak ash-blown against the breeze. With him was Pallando, now unhooded, his face deeply lined but alert, blue eyes glinting like storm-hung sea. Before them, beyond a knotted lattice of dead trees, the hill rose like a great shoulder of bone, and Dol Guldur waited, not abandoned, not dead, changed. It was Alatar who had come here last, not as a warrior, but as a seeker. Long ago, he had passed into this place in silence. None had seen him emerge. We should not tarry, Pallando murmured, his voice laced with unease. Even the air rebels. Indeed, the wind moved in strange circles. Leaves did not fall to the ground. They drifted sideways or hovered in place as though confused. The light itself was dimmed, though the sky above was cloudless. Do you feel it? Gandalf said. It is not his presence, not Sauron. No, Pallando replied. Worse in some ways, emptier. They began their ascent in silence. With each step the land became harder, the soil shifting to grey shale that cracked beneath their boots. Once, a tree reached out toward them, its branch twitching like a finger. Pallando raised his staff, not to strike, but to sing. A low note hummed from his lips. The tree recoiled. They moved on. As they neared the fortress, the stones themselves seemed wrong. They were not crumbling, they were growing, as if the ruin were building itself backward, arches half-formed, windows half-sealed, time folding inward, and still no sound of life, no raven's call, no whisper of rats, only the dull rhythm of their breath and the beating of their hearts. At last, they reached the outer wall, scorched and shattered in places, yet oddly preserved. Here, Gandalf placed his hand against the stone. Cold, not the cold of winter, the cold of memory. There is something beneath, he said. Pallando nodded. He buried it, or tried to, but shadows root deeper than spells. They entered through a cleft once torn by elven fire. Within, the hall was lit only by shafts of green light from broken ceilings. Moss crawled like veins up every column. At the center stood the remnants of a throne, not grand, but cruel, its seat sharp-edged and low to the ground. And behind it, stairs, curling downward. They did not hesitate. Step by step, torchless, wordless, they descended. As they went, the air grew warmer, not with fire, but decay. Old spells drifted across the stone like cobwebs woven from forgotten names. A feeling of watching pressed in on them, not malice, expectation. Gandalf paused. He knew we would come. Pallando said nothing. At the base of the stair, a chamber opened, wide, hollow, and at its center stood a single pedestal, upon which rested nothing. No jewel, no scroll, only a ring of scorched stone, as if something circular had burned itself into the floor. It was there they stopped and listened. Nothing stirred, but the shadow had not fled. It had changed shape. There was a presence in the walls, a breath not taken, a scream never uttered, the remnants of a will so focused, so stripped of voice and form, that it had become pure waiting. And Gandalf knew in that moment that Dol Guldur had not been abandoned. It had been left behind, a cocoon, a gate, and it had begun to open again. Beneath Dol Guldur, the steps ended, not at a floor, but at a threshold carved in no language known to elves or men. Its shape was irregular, like the fracture of a bone, and from it exhaled a draught that smelled of ash, rot, and rain on metal long buried. Pallando held up his hand, not in caution, but reverence. "The air remembers," he said. Indeed, every breath here clung to the lungs like mist that never dried. Gandalf felt it too, not fear precisely, but the recognition of fear's echo. The way old soldiers speak not of wounds, but of the sound before the strike. The chamber beyond was neither hall nor tomb. It was void, an empty span without architecture or ornament. The stone had melted in places, as if shaped not by tools, but by grief pressed against the world. No torches were lit. Still, both Istari could see, or rather feel. Shapes emerged not from light, but from awareness. To the left, a pillar carved with symbols that rearranged themselves as one looked. To the right, a basin of blackened water, perfectly still, despite the trembling beneath their feet. Ahead, a mass, neither altar nor throne, just presence, a mound of root, stone, and cloth, woven together by time and magic. Upon it, a hand, not alive, not fresh, but preserved by will alone. Blue robes, long decayed, clung to the form. "Alatar," Pallando whispered, and his voice cracked. He moved forward, though the shadows tightened around his ankles as he stepped. Gandalf followed. The body did not stir, but it had not been laid in rest. It had fallen, crumpled forward, as if slain mid-summoning. The staff beside it was split, the crystal atop it dulled to grey. Gandalf bent low. The face, though withered, bore no horror, no pain, only resolve, as if Alatar had given everything not in battle, but in binding. And there, inscribed in ash upon the floor, was a circle. No elvish or dwarven rune, only one line, unbroken, enclosing a spiral like the one Pallando had seen in the obsidian shard. It pulsed, once, then faded, and Gandalf understood. He sealed it. Pallando nodded slowly. With his life, with his voice, he did not fight the thing. He caged it in wordless memory. A long silence followed. Then, from the farthest wall, a sound, faint, software a hum. The two Istari turned, slowly, for haste held no place in this hollow. The wall was shifting, peeling, like skin from stone. Behind it, something shimmered. A mirror, number A pool, number A veil, and behind it, movement. "Pallando," Gandalf said, stepping back. "We should not remain." But Pallando was still, his eyes fixed on the veil, and his voice came hollow, as if spoken by memory itself. Before fire, there was voice. Before name, There was listening. This place here still. The veil pulsed. It did not open, but it breathed. Then the hum ceased, and silence returned. A silence so absolute it pressed into the flesh like cold. Gandalf took Pallando's arm. This was not meant for us. Not yet. Pallando nodded, but his gaze lingered. He holds it, still. And they turned, not in haste, not in fear, but in reverence. For what they had found was not a prison, nor a tomb. It was a vow, spoken by one who had given everything to prevent the return of what should not be named. As they climbed the stairs once more, Gandalf whispered, almost to himself, "We speak of Sauron, of the Eye, of the towers and the flames, but not of what lies beneath the bones of such things, not of the voices that taught him shadow." And Pallando replied, "There are evils that do not wish to rule. They wish only to be remembered." Above them, Dol Guldur loomed, but behind them, in the deep chamber where no bird sang and no light fell, a single hair from Alatar's head turned white, as if time had resumed its breath. The seal had not broken, but it had trembled. The air beneath Dol Guldur had grown heavier with each step downward, not warmer, but thicker, as if every breath pulled threads of memory from the stone itself. Gandalf and Pallando moved in silence, their cloaks brushing against walls slick with time. Their staffs cast no light, yet the path unfolded as if it remembered them. Beyond the chamber where Alatar had given himself, past the whispering spiral and the breathing veil, they came upon a door. It was not locked. It did not creak. It simply opened, not by hand, but by recognition. And within sat a man once called king. He did not rise. He did not look. His head rested against the damp wall, and his long hair, once bound in rings of gold, now hung loose and grey like riverweed dragged through ash. Chains bound his ankles, though they lay slack. This was not a prison made of iron. It was made of remains. Pallando stepped in first, the blue of his robe brushing against a mosaic faded to dust. His eyes did not blink. "Do you know us?" he asked, voice low, respectful. The figure stirred, his mouth twisted slowly, as though speaking for the first time in many winters. "I have forgotten names," he said, "but I know the color of your voices." Gandalf approached now, kneeling without fear. "You were of the 9 tribes of Rhûn," he said gently. "You ruled the plains beyond the Red Water. What broke you?" The man laughed, not in joy, but like dry bark snapping in the cold. "I ruled nothing," he said. "I sat upon a throne made of whispers. I thought them wise. I thought them mine." His fingers curled, and for the first time they saw it, a mark, burned into his palm, a spiral, not raised, not inked, but seared into flesh with such heat that it pulsed with a dull, dead light. "I was a prince of dust," he said, "and I listened to the wind. It spoke of power, of knowing, of remembering what the stars had hidden." He looked at them then, eyes wide, unseeing, but far from blind. "They do not come as flame or shadow. They come as meaning. They offer purpose. They teach you how the world was before breath." Pallando stepped forward. "Who?" The captive king lowered his hand. "They have no name," he whispered, "because they came before names. They are not evil. They are not hungry. They are emptiness that resents being filled." A silence stretched between them. "They do not want dominion," he said. "They want to unmake, not in hate, in relief." The torchless chamber seemed to grow darker, not in sight, but in sense. "Where did you hear them?" Gandalf asked. The prisoner's jaw trembled. beneath the fifth root of the tree that does not grow, in the hollow where time spills, in dreams I no longer forget. He raised his head now, and his face, though worn, bore the regal lines of an ancient chieftain. There was pain, but not madness, only witness. I sealed them in me, he said. When the wizards passed east, they stirred. Alatar tried to bind the first. I tried to hold the rest. But they slip, they drift. He pointed upward, not toward the sky, but toward the west. They are not bound to place, they are bound to memory, and the world forgets too easily. Pallando looked to Gandalf. We cannot fight what sleeps in the seams of thought, the grey wizard said quietly. No, replied the king, but you can remember, and in remembrance there is some resistance. His body shook then, not in convulsion, but like something inside him was tearing loose, a final flame. I will not last, he said, but I have one thing left. From his sleeve he withdrew a fragment of song, not parchment, not crystal, just a shape, made of air and syllable, that hovered for a breath between them. Pallando caught it in cupped hands, a memory, a name long swallowed. Norimel. What is it? Gandalf asked. A place, said the king, or a person, or both, the one who sang the first spiral into the world. His head fell. The chamber grew still, not cold, not dark, but emptied. Gandalf rose and touched the man's brow in farewell. Pallando held the syllable like a lantern between worlds. They left him there, not in chains, but in peace. And behind them, the spiral on the floor slowly closed like an eye too weary to weep. They had climbed once more from the deep hollows of Dol Guldur, but the air had changed behind them, though the ruin crumbled in silence above, and the trees of Mirkwood whispered only in windless murmurs. Something remained awake, not behind them, but within. It began in the place where Alatar had died. The spiral still burned faintly in the stone, pale blue against black. And though no sound escaped the room, a pressure pressed into the mind of Pallando as he neared it, like a hand not on his skin, but inside his soul. He staggered. Gandalf caught him. What is it? He asked. Pallando did not speak. He could not. Instead, he looked to the spiral and heard. You do not know me, but I was before what you call knowing. The voice did not echo in the chamber. It echoed in the bones. Gandalf felt it too. Then a tremble, subtle, like the moment before a landslide. His staff grew warm in his hand, not with fire, but with resistance. You call me Shadow because you do not know my shape. You call me evil because you cannot name my nature. But I am not born of fire, nor of will. I am what came after the first song ceased. Pallando fell to his knees. His hands clenched the edge of the circle. I spoke once with Sauron, when he was only a student of pride. I sang to Morgoth before he tore sound into dominion, and I remain because they forgot to finish me. Gandalf raised his voice then, old and thundered with command. You are not forgotten. You are named now, and you will pass. But the voice laughed, not harshly, but with a stillness more terrible than rage. You cannot banish what is not bound. You cannot unmake what is not made. I am the hollow in all things. And then it grew louder, not in volume, but in weight. I do not wear armor. I do not command armies. I do not need to rule. I wait for the world to tire of meaning, for the flame to forget its name. I am the silence beneath fire. Pallando began to weep, but not in grief. He wept as one who remembered a dream too large to carry. Gandalf leaned down beside him, speaking now not as wizard, but as friend. Do not listen. But it was not Pallando the voice sought. It was all who remember. Alatar could not bind me. He sang, yes, but he sang alone. And I am not a thing that fights. I'm a thing that survives. The circle on the ground pulsed. Once, twice. Then it began to hum. Not loud, but deep. A resonance, a vibration in the stone, in the air, in the soul. And from the far edge of the room, in the place where the wall once breathed, a ripple passed across the stone. The veil, still there, still sealed, but it shivered. Pallando rose slowly, voice hoarse, but steady. You will not pass. There was no answer, only silence, and that was worse. Later, when they stood in the daylight, if it could be called daylight beneath the twisted boughs of Mirkwood, Gandalf lit his pipe with trembling hands. What did you hear? He asked softly. Pallando did not look at him. I heard the sound that lives in all forgotten things. They spoke no more that night, but far to the east, past mountain and desert, in a land no map names, a child woke screaming, and on his tongue was a word he had never been taught. Narimel. They did not flee Dol Guldur, nor did they descend further into its roots. The blue and the grey stood upon its blackened parapet as the light of day failed, not from cloud or storm, but from a heaviness in the sky, as if even the sun turned its face away. A storm had gathered, but it was not of wind. The forest itself recoiled. The trees near the hill bowed backwards, their limbs twisting toward the north, away from the ruin as if dragged by invisible chains. Roots snapped in silence. Vines hung slack as if strangled, and the birds, what few remained, fell quiet, not in fear, but in submission. It had begun. Gandalf raised his staff. No command, no chant, just silence. Pallando stood beside him, his own staff trembling faintly, though his hands were still. His blue robes caught a wind that touched neither skin nor stone. Below them, the ground shifted. What had once been soil moved now as water, not flowing, but pulsing. Beneath the hill, something had stirred. It did not rise, did not reveal its form, but its presence was like a second gravity pulling all things inward. And then, from the west, where Dol Guldur's gate had long collapsed, came figures, shapes. They wore no armor, no banners. Their bodies were gaunt, draped in robes too long for their limbs, faces veiled in black silk. Their feet did not touch the ground. They hovered, almost gliding, and with each step, the grass beneath them turned to ash. Pallando whispered, "They are not servants." "No," said Gandalf, "they are echoes." The figures raised their heads as one. No faces, only mouths, hollow and stretched, not to speak, but to unformed sound. One raised an arm, and the air split, not like thunder, but like paper torn underwater. The ruins shuddered, and Gandalf stepped forward. With no word, he brought down his staff. From its tip leapt a ring of flame, not red or orange, but a piercing silver white. Fire that did not burn, but revealed. The ash upon the ground flared, and for an instant the figures' shapes wavered. They were not men, not elves, not even spirits. They were failures of memory, formed of forgotten things, like dust coalescing into despair. The fire reached them. Some vanished, others cracked like dry bark. But one remained, taller. It turned its face toward Pallando and spoke, not with sound, but with absence. A wave of silence hit them, so sudden and deep that Gandalf staggered back as though struck by a hammer. Pallando did not move. Instead, he lifted his staff, pressed its base into the ground, and sang. The flame Gandalf had cast rose higher, twisted, then spiraled around them both, forming a barrier, not of fire, but of remembrance. And in the center of it, Pallando's voice rose. Words not heard since the first days. Naurimel uve lantien. Ar ilye nierena alata na. Naurimel is not forgotten, and in all sorrow there is light. The shadow shrieked, not a scream, but a collapse of itself. The sound of something choosing to vanish rather than be named. And it fled, not westward, but down, back into the earth, back into the seam beneath the spiral, back into waiting. The flame sputtered, the sky began to breathe again, and the trees, slowly, untwisted their limbs. Dol Guldur stood wounded, not healed, but the darkness had withdrawn, for now. Gandalf leaned heavily on his staff. You sang the name, he said. Pallando nodded. The old name, the first seal. It is not power, it is truth, and the shadow despises truth more than flame. They stood side by side as the wind swept through the ruin. Somewhere far off, an owl called, for the first time in weeks. Night fell, but it was a normal night, and in the stars above, one shone blue, faint but steady. The wind of the east still clung to Gandalf's cloak as he rode once more into the valley of Imladris. There, under the long folded arms of ancient mountains, Elrond kept his hall, Rivendell, last haven of elves who had not yet turned their backs on the world. The sky was calm, the stars above clear, birds sang, but Gandalf's eyes, as he dismounted, saw none of it. The spiral burned still in memory. Behind him walked Pallando, wrapped in silence. The fire they had called at Dol Guldur had not consumed them, but it had marked them. They were not wounded, yet they had been touched by a truth that burned hotter than flame. Elrond met them beneath the eaves of the House of Healing. Too soon you return, he said softly. The east gave you no rest. Gandalf bowed his head. It gave us warning, and names long lost. That night, the White Council gathered, not in the courtly grandeur of old, but in a shadowed hall, lit only by pale moonlight falling through high glass. Galadriel sat as still as frost upon still water. Saruman, Curanir the White, stood tall, his robes perfect, his hands folded as though in prayer. Radagast did not come. Elrond presided in silence. Gandalf stepped forward and spoke. He told of Dol Guldur. It's not quite ruin, it's breathing veil. He told of Alatar, bound in spiral. He spoke of the captive king, of the voice beneath all voices, and of a darkness that did not conquer, but waited for memory to fail. When he finished, the hall was still. It was Saruman who broke the silence. This tale, Grey Pilgrim, bears much color, but little shape. Fire, yes. Spirals, a song. But what enemy stands behind it? Gandalf's voice held no anger. One older than the enemy you call by name. One without armies or eye. One that comes when remembrance fails. Saruman turned away. Then it is not a threat, for we remember, and we have light enough for such creeping fears. Pallando stepped forward now, his voice quieter but sharper. You remember war, you remember names, but what of truths unspoken? What of that which was never written, only sung once in the dark? Saruman laughed softly. The blue speaks in riddles, as ever. That is why we lost him to the east. You did not lose us, Pallando said. You turned away. Galadriel spoke then, and her voice quieted even the trees beyond the window. There is something beneath this. I do not see it clearly, but the world shifts, and memory wavers. I have walked in Lorien and found leaves that no longer know their names. Elrond leaned forward. What would you have us do? Gandalf unrolled a map, but not of Middle-earth, It was a memory map, drawn in lines of thought and broken song. It showed no borders, only points of failure where remembrance had grown thin. Dol Guldur, the Sea of Rune, the Dead Marshes, a hill with no name west of Umbar, and something buried in Eregion, long before Celebrimbor forged rings. These are the places where the veil wears thin, Gandalf said. And if we do not act, if we do not remember, it will rise through the cracks. Saruman shook his head. Your fears distract from the true enemy. Sauron grows, the Nine stir. Your spirals and shadows are delusions of lesser purpose. But Galadriel, without rising, said one word, Norimel, and the torches in the hall flickered. Even Saruman blinked. Where did you hear that name? He asked. In dream, she said, or memory, I do not know which. Then silence fell again. When the council ended, it was not in agreement. There was no vote, no decree, only Gandalf and Pallando preparing to leave, and Saruman watching them with eyes now more guarded than proud. You chase phantoms, he said as they passed him. Gandalf paused. Perhaps, he said, but phantoms, when forgotten, become real. That night, Saruman returned to his chamber. He unrolled a scroll sealed long ago, one from the west. Upon it was a word he had struck through long ago, Norimel, the forgotten flame. He lit a candle, and as its flame flickered, the shadow on the wall twisted. Snow fell thin across the grey mountains, a quiet snowfall, dry as ash, falling not from storm but from sky grown weary. Here the wind did not sing. It rasped, curled down ravines, and pulled at long-buried paths. Gandalf rode alone once more. Pallando had gone south to seek the root lords of Khand, whose dreams were older than the history. But Gandalf followed a different thread, one less ancient perhaps, but no less vital. The dwarves. They had long remembered what others forgot, not in song, not in lore, but in stone, in the carving of wall and vault, where memory held shape even as mountains cracked. And it was to the Iron Hills he rode first, where Dain Ironfoot kept court in a hall forged from red granite and smoke-veined steel. Dain met him at the threshold, helm under arm, eyes narrowed. You come with storm on your cloak, Grey Wanderer. I bring more than weather, Gandalf said, bowing low. Dain studied him, then led him inward. Beneath the mountain, halls echoed with hammers and voices singing deep-toned laments. The dwarves of the Iron Hills did not forget their dead, but they did not speak of them either. They carved their names into columns and let silence do the grieving. Gandalf spoke plainly. He told Dain of Dol Guldur, of the spiral, of the captive king, and the flame that revealed what lies beneath memory. Dain listened. He did not scoff, but neither did he nod. At length, he said, We have no love for whispers, but stone remembers, and lately stone has groaned in the night. We thought it ice. Perhaps it is not. Will you stand with us when the time comes? Gandalf asked. I will stand, Dain said, but not for ghosts, for stone, for oath. And that was enough. From there, Gandalf journeyed west, through paths known only to goats and madmen, to the Blue Spires, an outpost where Thorin Oakenshield had begun to gather his kin. They met beneath a stunted pine. Thorin's hair was tied in warrior's braid, his eyes hard, yet not yet bitter. You carry many names, Mithrandir, Thorin said. Which one asks for me now? The one that remembers, Gandalf replied. Thorin raised a brow. We remember gold, fire, the dragon. And what came before the dragon? Gandalf asked. What crept beneath Erebor's roots before Smaug curled upon them? What shaped the fear that no dwarf speaks of aloud? Thorin's hand tightened on the haft of his axe. You speak of shadow. I speak of forgetting, Gandalf said, and what it allows to grow. He unrolled the memory map, showed the spiral, the veil, Alatar's fall. Thorin studied it. Then softly he said, My grandfather once spoke of a tremor beneath the hoard, a tremor that came before Smaug ever flew. He thought it madness. He drank until he forgot it. Then perhaps, Gandalf said, it is time to remember again. Later, in the great common halls of the dwarves, firelight flickered over polished axes and old faces. Gandalf stood among them and told the tale. Not all believed, but some did. And in the forge chambers, ancient furnaces were relit. Old runes were repainted. And from the deepest vaults of forgotten halls, a single blade was brought forth, never named, never wielded, its edge still humming with a song written before Khazad-dûm had doors. It bore no spiral, but the metal shivered when it was near one, and that was enough. In the Isham, north, the winds grew louder, but so did the fires, not wild, not angry, but steady. Far from the trembling roots of Dol Guldur and the brooding silence of the east, beyond the quarrels of kings and the hammering halls of dwarves, lay a land untouched by the weight of great matters, the Shire, a simple name for a quiet land, though no place, however peaceful, is ever truly simple. Here the grass grew, not by command, but by kindness. The trees whispered only of the breeze, and the sky, when it rained, did so with gentle apology. In a round-doored hole in the ground, lined with polished wood and smelling faintly of lavender, Bilbo Baggins sat in a chair that had shaped itself to him over time and read aloud to no one in particular. Elves are tall, he muttered, finger tracing a line, and never spill wine, which I find rather intimidating. He chuckled. Outside, the kettle whistled. Inside, the fire crackled low, its flames casting gentle light on walls stacked with books, maps, and curious brass instruments whose functions even Bilbo didn't fully understand. And yet, of late, things had changed. Nothing anyone else might notice, of course. The ale still tasted fine. The flowers still bloomed. But some mornings, Bilbo awoke with a line of song in his head he could not remember learning. And once, while trimming his rose bushes, he'd unearthed a stone so dark and smooth it felt alive in his palm. He'd buried it again. That night, he dreamed of trees, twisting but not wicked, just watching. He told no one. What was there to tell? But Gandalf remembered, for he had passed through the Shire many times before, long before dragons and riddles and trolls, and he had known then, as he knew now, that in the great weaving of the world there were threads that glowed quietly, unseen until the moment came when they were pulled. He remembered a day long past beneath the party tree, when Bilbo had asked him, "Is it true that trees dream, Gandalf?" And the wizard, pipe in hand, had smiled without answering. Now, as Gandalf watched the fires rise in the north and shadows ripple across the east, he thought again of that small voice, the one that had asked nothing, yet felt everything. That very evening in Bag End, Bilbo sat at his writing desk, quill in hand, staring at a blank page. He didn't know why he couldn't write. Words had never troubled him before. But now, every sentence felt wrong, not untrue, just too small. And then, without warning, the candle beside him flickered blue, only for a heartbeat. But it was enough. He rose slowly and crossed to the window. The garden lay quiet. The moon glowed softly, and on the sill rested a single feather, blue. He did not know how it had come there. He did not remember hearing wings, yet he picked it up with careful fingers, held it to the light. It shimmered, not with color, but with memory. For a moment, just a moment, he saw something. A tower, broken but dreaming. A man in blue robes, singing to fire. A ring upon a stone that pulsed like a heartbeat. Then it faded, and the feather was just a feather. Bilbo set it gently in a drawer and went back to bed, but he did not sleep for some time. In the east, beneath a mountain whose name had been erased, a child looked up at the same moon. He did not speak Westron. He had never seen the sea, but he hummed a tune no one had taught him, a hobbit lullaby, twisted and strange, as though blown by a wind that had circled the world too many times, and in his hand was a spiral drawn in dirt. He did not know why he had drawn it, but he knew he must never forget it. It was spring in Eriador, and the snows had barely receded from the roots of the misty mountains when Gandalf crossed the Bruinen once more, this time not as a wanderer, but with intent. The fire lit at Dol Guldur had not burned out. It had exposed something older, deeper, something that would not stay buried. Alatar's sacrifice had not closed the door, only held it, and such seals did not endure without action. There was little time, and there was only one way forward. He arrived in the blue spires of the northern range by night, where the last of Thorin's company was gathering, not yet a fellowship, but a forge not yet struck. The dwarves there greeted Gandalf with suspicion, but not resistance. He was known, and more importantly, he was remembered. Thorin Oakenshield stood before a fire too small for his mood, staring at the glowing map that Gandalf unrolled across the stone. "This," Thorin said, tapping a mountain etched in gold, "is what I want. Erebor, the kingdom that was." "And this," Gandalf replied, placing his finger far to the south, near the blackened crescent of Mirkwood, "is what wants you not to take it." Thorin's brow furrowed. "You still speak in riddles." Gandalf leaned close. "The dragon is not the end. Smaug is only a breath in a much longer curse. Beneath Erebor is something older. The gold did not sleep long. It fed a hunger older than fire. If you go, you do not only awaken Smaug, you awaken what lies beneath." The room fell still, but Thorin's voice did not tremble. "Then I will wake it, and I will bury it." Gandalf studied him. "Do you understand what you may be facing? I understand that dwarves forget little, and that some of us are ready to remember everything." There it was, the answer he had hoped for, not vengeance, not greed, resolve. From his cloak, Gandalf drew the obsidian spiral, a shard from Dol Guldur, black as frozen night, marked with the same curling symbol Alatar had died protecting. Thorin touched it and flinched. "It sings," he whispered. "Yes," Gandalf said, "and it listens." They laid plans that night, not for war, for movement, for misdirection, for opening one door while sealing another. They would reclaim Erebor, but beneath that, a second plan would bloom to divert the eye of the enemy, yes, but also to test the spiral's reach. And for that, Gandalf knew what was needed most. Not warriors, not kings, a burglar. In the morning, a raven flew westward, black wings beating hard against the wind. It bore no words, only a thread of blue ribbon tied to its leg. A name had been chosen. The plan had begun. In the east, a hermit in blue watched the same raven pass overhead, and whispered, "At last." He turned from the cliff, where he had carved a new spiral into the stone. Not a seal this time, but a trap. It shimmered in the morning sun. In the farthest reaches of the sea, beyond the maps of even the Númenóreans, something in the water stirred. Not waves, a memory. And in the Shire, Bilbo Baggins sneezed loudly into a handkerchief and declared that someone was surely talking about him. He did not know how right he was. Far beneath the lonely mountain, deep in chambers where gold lay piled like autumn leaves, where the bones of dwarves had long since become part of the stone, something shifted. Not a roar, not a breath, just a ripple across a single coin. It rang softly against another and another, until the sound, faint and constant, moved like water across the hoard. Then came a sound deeper than gold, a rumble from a throat not used in decades. Smaug stirred. He did not open his eyes at once. Dragons do not wake as men do. They rise slowly as memory, stretching across flame and bone. He felt the air first, and it was changed. Colder, perhaps, or clearer. Something had entered his dream, not feet nor blade, but a shape that did not belong, a whisper, a spiral. He opened one eye, a red slit in a cavern of gold. He sniffed, and then slowly, he rose. His body was immense, a mountain unto itself, forged in fire, plated in scale. His wings, though folded, rustled like thunder wrapped in silk. He moved like a continent, shifting in the dark. Above him, the ceiling trembled, not from his motion, from something beneath him. Smaug paused. He pressed his massive head low against the stone. Listened. He heard it, faint but rising. A hum. No song, no wind. A vibration in the bones of the earth. And beneath it, a presence. Familiar, though long forgotten. It was not the dwarves, not the treasure hunters, not the wizards meddling. No, it was older, and it was calling. Far above, on the outer slopes of Erebor, miners in the service of the Iron Hills stepped back as the ground beneath them shifted. "Did you feel that?" one asked. The other said nothing, his eyes fixed on a runestone in the cliff. It had cracked, and within the crack he saw it, a spiral. He backed away, but the stone whispered. Back beneath the mountain, Smaug exhaled, and the gold shivered. He spoke aloud, his voice like falling cities. "Who walks beneath my bed of flame?" The answer was not in words, but in pulse, a rhythm from deep below the lowest vaults where no dwarf had ever dared dig. Smaug, Prince of Ruin, Lord of Flame, felt for the first time in an age, not pride, not wrath, but a thin thread of unease. He turned, and there, in the corner of his hoard, where the gold had piled undisturbed for half a century, something glowed. A coin, a jewel, number A stone, black as obsidian, etched with a spiral so fine it seemed carved by silence itself. It was not his. He would never allow something so small, so unremarkable, into his hoard. And yet it lay there, humming. Smaug reached for it with one claw, but the moment his talon neared it, it moved, not away, not toward. It simply vanished. Or had it ever been there? He roared then, a sound so vast it split ancient pillars and sent cracks through long dormant chambers. The mountain groaned. Outside, snow cascaded from the peaks in waves. Birds fled, men looked up from their forges, elves turned westward, and in the Shire, Bilbo Baggins dropped a teacup. He did not know why, but the sound echoed in his ears far too long. Back at the foot of the mountain, Thorin Oakenshield stared at the cracked runestone, Gandalf beside him. "You said Smaug would stir," Thorin whispered. "But this is not the dragon," Gandalf said. This is what lies beneath him. He turned toward the peak, and somewhere in the roots of the world, the spiral turned once more. Far to the south, in the veiled lands beyond the Ash Mountains, where even the stars withdrew their light, a fortress of stone and shadow rose anew. Barad-dûr, not yet crowned, not yet whole, but rising, stone by stone, built not by mason's hand, but by will, cruel and ancient. It grew without sound, save for the pulse of dread that radiated from its roots. And beneath its foundations, where sunlight had never fallen, the forges burned. Black iron hissed, chains clinked, and the air was full of whispers. He returns. The eye turns east. It is time. They were orcs, yes, thousands, but changed. No longer bickering tribes of ruin, but shaped, focused, their tongues twisted by a new command. Their captain stood alone upon a jutting spire of obsidian, tall, armored in dull red steel, with a helm shaped like the maw of a wolf. They called him Mordrak, though his true name had long been swallowed by fire. He had been promised blood. He had been promised a world without stars. And above all, he had been promised a chance to cut the west. But not yet. Not while the blade remained hidden. He turned toward the north. Not to Erebor, but beyond. To the wastes where even the maps thinned. Where something else stirred. In the farthest east, beyond Rhûn. Beyond the lands known even to the lawmasters of Gondor. A tribe of men known as the Kagarim felt the ground warm beneath their sacred lake. They had once served blue-cloaked wanderers. Star priests, they called them. But the priests had vanished. And now, beneath the lake's surface, the waters no longer reflected the moon. They reflected something black. In the temple of Yarakadar, a priestess watched the spiral grow across the floor tiles. Not painted, not carved, grown, like lichen. She wept. And in the burned plains of Mordor, where ash still hung in the wind, the mouth of Sauron stirred in his high chamber. He touched the bone-white scroll upon his desk, a prophecy from an age even he feared to name. Upon it was written, "When the two who fell rise once more, and fire awakens in the house of stone, the blade that never drank shall thirst, and silence shall bear the eye again." He smiled, toothless, cracked, but he smiled. Gandalf stood at the edge of a tall cliff near the high pass, watching the clouds drift over the mountains. He said nothing, but in his hand he held a fragment, not stone, not metal, a piece of a dream, given to him by the last seer of Imlad Morgul before the city fell. It shimmered faintly with blue light, then darkened. He turned to Radagast, who sat beside him feeding a fox. "They gather," Gandalf said. "Yes," the brown wizard answered, brushing moss from his sleeve. "But we have not yet drawn our blade." Gandalf closed his hand. "No," he murmured, "but we will." Far beneath the ruins of Dol Guldur, beyond even the chamber where Alatar vanished, a gate pulsed in the rock. No door, no hinges, just a spiral wide as a hall, glowing faintly with every breath of the world. From the other side, something watched. It did not yet enter, but it leaned closer. And in a quiet hill above Hobbiton, Bilbo Baggins found an old blade in his father's chest. Small, ornate, dusty. He did not know why he drew it, only that the moment he touched the hilt, the hairs on his neck rose. He stared at it, and it seemed, just for a second, that the blade remembered him. He put it back, but it was too late. The blade had been drawn, if only in spirit. The lonely mountain stood proud beneath a sky of molten gold. Snow still crowned its peak, but along the slopes, smoke curled once more. Not of ruin, but of forge fires rekindled. Erebor had been reclaimed. The great halls echoed with voices once silenced. Dwarves from the Iron Hills, from distant Blue Mountain holds, and even scattered remnants from the west. They came not only to fight, but to rebuild. Stone rang beneath boot and hammer. The old anthems returned, rising from the forges and tunnels, echoing through the hollow ribs of the mountain, as if Durin himself breathed again. In the high throne hall, Thorin Oakenshield sat in quiet wonder. The Arkenstone, that pale jewel of myth, rested in a casket at his side. Yet he did not look at it. His eyes were fixed on the eastern gate. "Still you watch?" Balin murmured behind him. "I must," Thorin answered, his voice low. It was never only the dragon. And he was right. For though Smaug had fallen, pierced by Bard's black arrow in a cry that split the valley, the shadows that had stirred beneath him had not died. They had simply moved through tunnels untouched by light, where dwarves once delved too greedily and too deep. Something unseen passed, quiet as frost in caverns, drawn not by gold but by memory. In Dale, rebuilt by hands that remembered loss, Bard stood upon the Tower of Wind, watching smoke rise peacefully from the chimneys. Below, children laughed in the markets, bells chimed. But in the river, a swan floated past, its wings still, its feathers singed. Bard frowned. The waters were growing warm. At the borders of Mirkwood, Thranduil listened as the forest groaned, not in speech, but in warning. The spiders had fled, not slain, but scattered. Something greater now passed beneath the leaves. Even the oldest trees drew their roots inward. He summoned his guard. "We are not yet at peace," he said, "only at pause." In Erebor's deepest vault, where Smaug's scorched bones still steamed and the gold had begun to be cleared away, a dwarf named Nar uncovered a stone unlike the rest, black, smooth, and warm. Not gold, not silver, a spiral inlaid with blue. He lifted it, and it pulsed in his hand. Before he could speak, the vault groaned, and a crack split the wall. Just a line, no more than a breath wide. But from it came cold, a cold that was not of ice, but of depth. He dropped the stone, and in the silence that followed, a wind blew from the crack, carrying no scent, no dust, only the sense of being watched. In the throne hall, Thorin turned at once. He did not know why, but he drew his sword, and as he did, somewhere far away, a spiral in the ruins of Dol Guldur turned again, clockwise. At the edge of the Shire, Gandalf rode alone. He paused on a green hill, pipe in hand, and looked to the east. He could not yet see the mountain, but he felt its tremble. "The king has returned," he said aloud, but his eyes narrowed, "and the darkness waits for him." In the deep libraries of Rivendell, Elrond read by starlight. He came upon a passage, old, half erased, bound in silver. "He who awakens the fire may warm the world, but fire obeys no master." He closed the book, looked out the window, and whispered, "It has begun again." And in the sky above Erebor, for the first time in 1,000 years, the ravens returned. They circled high. Then one broke from the flock, descending fast. It landed beside Thorin's throne and cawed once. In a drawer of a modest round home, nestled under hill and hill lane, beneath the green and flowering turf of Hobbiton, there lay a plain wooden box, and within the box, wrapped in cloth older than its keeper, lay a ring. It had not moved, not rolled, not sung, yet something within it had stirred. Bilbo Baggins, now 60, and in the calm of a well-ordered life, had nearly forgotten it, or tried to. He wore it no longer, save for 1 or 2 disappearances at parties, and even then it left him cold. It lay heavy in memory, heavier still in his pocket, and now it seemed even heavier in dream. He had woken twice this week from dreams not his own, dreams of dark towers, of fire in stone halls, of a voice with no face, calling across great distances, not in words, but in hunger. He shook his head, made tea, and whistled a tune he didn't feel. Yet still, the ring slept beneath his house, or pretended to. Far away, deep in the east of the world, where mountains curved like broken ribs and the sky was orange with ash, 2 figures walked the ruins of a temple half buried in sand. One wore robes of white streaked with blue, the stars of the heavens stitched into the hem. The other wore a staff carved with spiral sigils. They did not speak, for speech here summoned echoes that did not belong to the living. They were the blue wizards, and they had found a stone altar cracked by lightning, with a spiral cut into it, the same shape seen in Dol Guldur, Erebor, and beneath the lake of Yarakadar. Alatar knelt, Pallando stood, and above them, written in the fractured script of the first tongue, they read the words, "The ring shall slumber until called by war." Alatar looked to the horizon. Then the time is near. In Mordor, a great silence settled. The mouth of Sauron sat upon his withered throne. A blackened map spread before him. At its center, a circle where Barad-dûr would rise. But on its western edge, he marked a place with no name. The Shire. "A child's land," he muttered, "a gardener's tale." But still he stared at it, and in the black flame that flickered in the brazier beside him, a faint golden glint shone, like a ring catching firelight. He smiled. Not yet, but soon. In Rivendell, Elrond called a quiet council of none. He stood before the empty chairs of the Eldar and laid before them a scroll. On it, a prophecy only he and one other had seen. The handwriting was delicate, his brother's. One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. He folded the parchment, hands trembling just slightly, then looked northward, toward a green land of peace, towards something that even the wise had overlooked. In the heart of Lorien, Galadriel stood barefoot beneath the malon trees, silver hair loose in the windless air. The waters of her mirror were still, too still. She dipped her hand in, and ripples spread, wide, blue, gold, black. Images formed, a small hand, a ring, an eye, vast, lidless. She closed her hand. Her voice, like bells in fog, echoed into the leaves. He begins to remember. And in Hobbiton, Bilbo walked the garden paths with Frodo, the boy running ahead, laughing, chasing butterflies. Bilbo smiled, but then stopped. He looked toward Bag End. And for a moment, just a flicker, the round green door was open, not ajar, open, and a shadow stood within, tall, pale-eyed, unmoving. Bilbo blinked, and it was gone. He shook his head, smiled again, but slower this time. That night, he took the ring from the box, held it up, watched it gleam under the moonlight through the window, and for the first time in a long while, he whispered aloud, "What are you?" No answer, but in the next room, the candle flickered, and somewhere far beneath the mountains, in vaults lost even to maps, a spiral turned once more. The fortress of Dol Guldur stood as a wound upon the greenwood, its towers blackened, its stones veined with old poison. No wind stirred here, for even the air feared remembrance. But the White Council had come, and they had brought light. Gandalf stood at the edge of the broken gate, cloak torn, staff scorched at the tip. Galadriel hovered beside him, her presence like the moon, still, radiant, and sorrowful. Saruman, in white robes now dusted grey, paced like a falcon in a cage, murmuring to himself. Radagast knelt beside a fallen tree, weeping silently for the thrushes that would never return. Smoke still curled from cracks in the stone. The spell that had cloaked the fortress, the veil of dread and illusion, had been torn asunder by Galadriel's will, shattered by words older than the moon. But no triumph rang here. The halls were empty, too empty. "It is gone," Gandalf said, voice low. "Gone before we came." Saruman turned sharply. "It fled. That is not the same as vanquished. Or it was never truly here," Galadriel added, eyes narrowing. "Only its breath, drawn long and deep through the bones of this ruin." They moved through the corridors, each echo clinging to them like cobwebs. In the tower's heart, they found the remnants of a great ritual, a spiral of scorched floorboards, charred feathers, and bones in careful circles. Radagast shivered. "A nesting place," he said. "Not for a beast, but for a will." Saruman scoffed, though quietly. "No more than parlor tricks. The real power lies elsewhere." "Then show us," Gandalf said, voice edged. But Saruman said nothing, only stared at the ashes. Above them, the sun broke through the mist. A single ray pierced the tower and struck a wall, illuminating something etched into the stone. Words not seen in ages. "Barad-dûr shall rise again, when fire knows its name." Saruman's face changed, just a flicker, a hint of thought unspoken. Galadriel saw it, but said nothing. Yet, the White Council gathered in the high chamber. From here they could see across the greenwood to where Mirkwood had begun to heal. Already, birds had returned, vines stretched cautiously over the black stone. "It will take 1,000 years," Radagast said, "and still it will not forget." Galadriel turned her gaze east. No land touched by that hand ever forgets. As they departed, Galadriel remained behind. She stepped once more into the tower's heart and laid her hand upon the wall. The stone remembered her. It hissed, cracked, and from its seam, a black mist slithered out like a scream that had waited centuries to escape. Galadriel did not flinch. She whispered, in a voice not made for mortals, "Be gone," and the shadow was cast out. A wind rose, wild, wailing, and then vanished. The tower stilled. Dol Guldur was cleansed. But as she turned to leave, Galadriel looked south, and a memory passed through her, of a land where fire flowed in rings, where eyes burned without blinking, and where hope was not yet born. She said softly, "It has left this place, but not this world." Far away, across the plains of Gorgoroth, the ground cracked, and from the chasm rose a faint red glow. No tower, no form, only a presence, low, humming, and hateful. It drifted like smoke, gathering where no light touched. A will unmoored. It remembered Dol Guldur. It remembered defeat. And now it sought a name. In the library of Isengard, Saruman stood long before a silver mirror. Not one of reflection, but of vision. And in it he saw fire, wrapped in rings, coiling through mountain roots. He whispered, "It was here." And behind him, on the shelves once used for song and scroll, now lay books of black binding, unopened, yet close, too close. In Rivendell, Elrond sealed the scroll he had opened just weeks before. He placed it in a box of elm and runes, and locked it 3 times. The sound echoed like thunder in the peaceful halls. In the Shire, the grass grew long and sweet. Children chased fireflies. Bilbo sat on his bench, staring at a pipe he had not lit. And underground, the ring pulsed once, just once, but the earth remembered, and far away, in the coldest cavern of the misty mountains, a creature stirred, not woken, but twitching in sleep, mouth open, murmuring one word again and again: precious. The wind moved gently across the fields of Narduin, where no banners flew and no battles had been fought, only time. Here the tall grasses swayed as if in thought, and the silver-throated larks wove their songs through the warm air like threads of memory. Far in the distance, the towers of Imladris shimmered between light and leaf, a place of healing, a place of warning. Elrond walked alone upon the high ridge. The sun touched the edge of the world, and the land turned to gold. "The world is not yet broken," he whispered, but he did not smile. In Lorien, Galadriel stood beneath the golden malon trees, her hands resting lightly upon a basin of still water. She gazed into it, not to see the future, but to feel the tremor in its bones. The shadow had moved. It had slipped beneath the world like a snake through roots, leaving no footprints but many wounds. And yet, in the water's depths, she saw a flicker, a hobbit child laughing in the sun, a dwarf hammering joyfully in Erebor, a young man in Gondor learning to read old tongues, a ranger walking beneath stars he could not name, a gardener planting a tree beside his door, and somewhere beyond the edges of prophecy, a quiet fire, not of war, but of endurance. She breathed deeply and turned away from the basin. The mountains remembered, even when men forgot. High above the world, where the snows never melted and the wind was older than the moon, the peaks stood like ancient sentinels. They bore no names in any tongue now spoken, but they listened to footsteps, to fire, to fate, and deep beneath one such peak, the ring still whispered, but not loudly, not yet. In a glade not marked on any map, Radagast spoke to a wounded stag. The creature's flank was burned, old ash still clinging to the fur. He ran his hand gently over it, whispering to the leaves, and the forest bent towards him. "We do not war," Radagast said, "but we endure, and in enduring we heal." Above him, the first stars blinked awake. In the Shire, a pipe was lit. The smoke curled upward, not from fear, nor from omen, but from peace. Bilbo sat on the step of Bag End. The sky was deepening, the first evening crickets singing. He felt it too, though he could not name it, the stirring far away. A weight not yet his, a tale not yet told. He looked down at the ring in his pocket, then up at the stars. "Not yet," he murmured, and the wind carried it. Atop a high hill in the Southlands, Gandalf stood beneath the open sky. His cloak flapped like wings of memory. In one hand, his staff. In the other, his pipe, unlit. A star fell in the distance, silver and slow. He watched it vanish. "The darkness sleeps, but it is not gone," he said. "It dreams, and dreams learn to walk." He turned, began the long descent. But so do we. In the ruined watchtower of Amon Sul, long forgotten, moss-covered and hollow, an owl stirred from its slumber and perched once more on a window that had seen the rise and fall of kings. The wind carried no song, but it carried a truth. The war had not begun, but neither had it been lost. Thus ends this tale not of victory, but of the edge of light, a tale of old friends not yet met, of kings not yet crowned, of burdens not yet borne, and of small hands that would one day carry the world. The secret fire still burns, and in ashes, hope waits.